Hi, I'm Randal Schwartz, host of FLOSS Weekly. This week, Dan Lynch joins me. We're going to talk about oVirt, which is the virtualization platform that's open source and ready to use. You're going to want to see this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for FLOSS Weekly is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is FLOSS Weekly with Randal Schwartz and Dan Lynch. Episode 203, recorded on March 7th, 2012. oVirt. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies on your PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or TV instantly. All streamed directly to you, saving you time, money, and hassle. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit. It's time for FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randal Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com, back after almost a month absence. Boy, I think time flies when you're on a cruise ship and when you're nursing your sore shoulder and everything else that's been kept me away from the show. But luckily, we have wonderful people take over when I'm not here, including our host today, Dan Lynch. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, it's great to be back. And I'm glad your shoulder's improved, Randal.
Yeah. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I had to cancel because I woke up. I wrenched my shoulder. Apparently, I'm getting older. I've turned 50, and the parts don't work the same way they used to. And I pulled my shoulder carrying my 22-pound computer bag. I was throwing the strap over the shoulder, and then even doing that just hurt. I should stop doing that, even to demonstrate it. But one Wednesday morning when I woke up, it was just completely inflamed, and I spent the whole day pretty much in bed, just typing enough to say, "Hello, I'm not doing the show." It's about all the typing I've done that day. But thank you also for stepping in. You did that show too as well, right? The shoulder.
That's right, yeah. Me and Simon, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys were able to pull that off because that really helped keep the flow going. And I want to apologize for last week's cancellation. At the last minute, our guest said, fighting fires don't have time to be on the show, and we're sorry about that, but that does happen from time to time. He is being rescheduled for a later slot, so it's not like we're going to miss out. But we do have a great couple of guests today. We have, let's see if I find my notes here, we have Itamar Heim, who manages the Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization Manager Engineering Group. That's a lot of stuff to say. We also have Karsten who is an open source community manager and coordinator for Red Hat as well. But we're going to talk about oVirt, O-V-I-R-T. It's a virtualization platform. I know we've had a few of those on the show in the past, but it's basically a way for people to manage their hardware such that they're running, like first a Linux virtual layer or Linux real layer, and then have a virtual guest hosts running on them, typically Linux as well. And it's useful for medium and large size data centers for enterprise and things like that. So looks like it's going to be pretty interesting. Have you had much experience with oVirt, Dan?
Yeah, I have actually. I've seen it in practice at a Red Hat Summit, and it looks really good. They use it for managing. It gives a web interface, which is great, and they use it for managing all this stuff. And I just want to quickly say, I brought something along to make the guys feel more at home if they you want to. So for the benefit of those without video, I've just put on a red hat. So they've got some idea. I don't think I'll wear that for the whole show, but at least it might make them feel more at home.
Exactly. I don't have a red hat with me, so I guess I can't make them feel very comfortable at all. So look, sounds like a really great show. But before we get into our show, we have to bring up our sponsor for this week. So this week, we have this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Netflix. Netflix streams thousands of TV episodes and movies directly to you instantly, which means that you save time, money, and hassle. There are several easy ways to instantly access streaming movies and TV shows with Netflix. You can watch Netflix movies and TV shows on your Mac, PC, or iPad. You can watch on your iPhone and some Android phones as well. And if you have a gaming console, an Xbox 360, a PS3, or a Nintendo Wii, you can watch Netflix right on your TV. And if you're not a gamer, you can watch Netflix on your TV with an Apple TV box or a Roku box. They're inexpensive and easy to use. With Netflix, you can watch movies and TV shows instantly using any of these devices. And you can begin watching a movie or show on one device and then finish on a different one. Whichever way you choose to access Netflix, you can watch as many movies and TV shows as you want, anytime that you want. And you can cancel anytime. So try Netflix today for 30 days free. So you go to netflix.com/twit. That's netflix.com/TWIT. Be sure to use this URL when you sign up for your free trial. We thank Netflix for their support of TWiT and FLOSS Weekly. And we hope that you enjoy watching instantly with Netflix. And now let's go ahead and bring on our guests. Let's first introduce Itamar Heim. Itamar, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hi, Randal.
Yeah, hello. Hi. Where are we speaking to you from? No, that's backwards. Where are you speaking to us from?
I'm speaking to you from Israel.
Oh, very good. You sound like you're right next door, which is really nice. I love how the internet sometimes work and cooperate like that. And so let's also bring on our other guest, Karsten Wade. Karsten, welcome to the show.
Hi, good morning, or good afternoon or evening, depending where you are.
Exactly. We can be anywhere. And where are you speaking to us from?
I'm calling from Santa Cruz, California.
It's a bit closer. In fact, it's about halfway between me and the brick house. So you're sort of bisecting us for that. So that's really nice. So let's go back to Itamar. Itamar, I gave a rough view of what oVirt, or at least what I could crib in a couple of hours of research. I gave a rough view at the beginning of the show. But why don't you, let's start with like the 30,000 foot level. What is oVirt about, and what problem does it solve?
So oVirt is a platform for data center virtualization. It's about solving provisioning of virtual machines to host. You have usually a group of hosts that you want to run virtual machines. If you'll think about VMware, it's basically parallel to VMware vSphere, which oVirt is the open source alternative to. And it takes care of the entire life cycle of managing virtual machines, from provisioning the hosts, configuring virtual networks, virtual storage, and virtual machines on those hosts. It allows you to do anything from automation through SDK and CLI, or everything from a UI, full-based web admin that you can do all the administration from, or if you want to delegate your operations to users, they can use you can use a self-service portal and let users create virtual machines on their own. So everything you need to do around virtual machine lifecycle management.
Okay, so virtual machine is we've actually had a few guests on the show already talking about that, but just to recap for our audience, what would I use a virtual machine for?
So the most common use case for enterprises would be server consolidation. You used to have physical servers. They wouldn't use all the resources they need. You can put, with the servers being stronger, each year, more memory, more CPU, you can put on a single server multiple workloads together. Now, you'd want to isolate between those workloads. So each workload will think it's running on its own physical server. A virtual machine is a virtual server for that workload. So it provides isolation between those workloads for server consolidation. That was, I think, probably the most common use case. But as enterprises moved more and more to virtualization, they found out that it's also useful even if you want to run a single virtual machine on a physical server, a single workload, you'd still like to use a virtual machine because it provides abstraction from the hardware. If I have a virtual workload, the operating system running inside a virtual machine, I can now, because it's decoupled, it's not running on the physical server, rather on the virtual server, I can now do things like live migration, moving the workload from one server to another without affecting the application. So even if I want to run a single workload, now I can maintain my host. I want to upgrade my server to have more CPUs, more memory. I can move the host to maintenance in my management system, oVirt, for example, which will live migrate this workload to another host. I can now fix my physical server, upgrade use another one, and live migrate the virtual machines back to that server. So it's not only about putting multiple workloads on a single server because they're becoming stronger. It's also about agility in how you manage your data center infrastructure, because you can now do operations on physical server without affecting what's running on them.
Wow, great explanation. I really appreciate the details of that. In fact, you just answered 5 of the questions I was going to ask next, so that's great. Hey, so what's your relationship with the project? How did you get involved? And that's it. How did you get involved?
So oVirt started from a collaboration between multiple companies, Red Hat being one of them, but other large companies such as IBM, Cisco, Intel, NetApp, SUSE, and Canonical, looking for an alternative, an open source alternative for VMware vSphere. The place I came from, which is Red Hat, is the core of the code that was contributed by Red Hat to oVirt based on the Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization product that we had. My origin in that product, it goes back to the Israeli startup of Qumranet, which Red Hat bought in 2008 for the technologies of KVM, Spice, and Solidage, which later became Rev. So we've worked hard on the making Solidage Rev. Solidage was based on technologies Red Hat found hard to open source. It was based on Windows technologies like Windows Server, C#. We worked hard to port that to open source technologies running on Java and Linux, and then we open sourced this for as part of the oVirt launch, which we did with all those companies, trying to build a group of companies providing and supporting this project, not just a Red Hat project.
Great explanation there as well. I just want to go over to Karsten for a minute. Karsten, what's your relationship with the project?
So I'm a community architect at Red Hat, and that means that I pay attention to how we put projects together and either help start a project from scratch for open sourcing something like this, or get in to help work with other projects to improve the processes, or basically help in any way that we can. So the Rev team, when they were looking to open source the code, came to us and asked if we would assist in essentially anything that we could do to get things going. So that was everything from putting up the oVirt.org website to running the first workshop last November here in San Jose. So
now, Karsten, you mentioned...
I pay attention to make sure. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Sorry. I thought you'd stop there. Apologies for that.
I did, mentioned and there was this long pause. I'm like, oh my God, I better keep talking. No, go ahead.
Dramatic pause. So you mentioned you're a community architect. I was looking at your governance model around oVirt, and it really interested me because you said that you've looked at the way that the Eclipse community works, and also the Apache Software Foundation, and you've come up with a way of kind of I don't have a better way to explain it, but kind of grading projects for their maturity, and then that dictates how much control the oVirt board will have over it. Can you explain a little bit around that and how that works?
Sure. And let me go at this a little bit backwards, because I want to go back into something that Itamar said before, which is that the makeup of the initial board is seeded by the companies that began, who joined in and pledged to have resources work on the project. So that would be, let's see if I can do this off the top of my head, SUSE, Canonical, NetApp, IBM, Intel, Red Hat. Did I miss anybody? I think did I say Cisco? Good. I think that's everybody. And so the initial board was put together with that. So each one of those people has a leadership position on the board. And then all of the project leaders for the initial starting projects also have a position on the board. And so the board doesn't have a limit on the size that it is. It's essentially a growing body of people who have an interest in a deep stake within the project. And then, so essentially everybody is kind of grandfathered in at the very beginning. And then for people to either get a new project on board, or to take a project and to go from on board and actually have a seat on the project board itself, That was too many uses of the word board. Sorry about that. To bring a project into oVirt and then get a seat on the board is a process of first essentially proposing a project and getting started on it. And the project board will oversee what's going on with the project until there are enough maintainers. And the maintainers are a terminology borrowed from Apache Foundation directly. And so these would be people who have commit access to put code into the repository, or are doing other tasks like documentation or design. But essentially, they're somebody who's considered to be part of the core team and setting the direction of that team. And once there are 3 maintainers, the project is considered to be able to stand alone, and the board can vote if it's going to continue to be included. So these are the parts that are borrowed from the Apache model of kind of bringing projects in an incubating sense, and then allowing them to mature until they're ready to stand alone themselves within the project. And at that time, they also gain a seat on the board to be able to help set the direction of the project overall. So it's a pure meritocracy in that sense of people who come in and do things and who show that they're doing things and grow projects that matter. And the projects all have to fit within the oVirt world. So it's not just any project. And then that way it's similar to what's going on with Apache and Eclipse in terms of bringing together different corporations who have interests, their technical people who have the interest, and then people from the open source communities who have interest, and giving everybody a level playing field once things get started. And one of the reasons why we started this level playing field with so many other companies was, as Itamar said, we didn't want this to be a Red Hat only thing. This is a common technology. This is something that needs to be done by the whole world, basically. So we wanted to make it really clear from the beginning that it was on an even footing for all of these people who are part of the Open Virtualization Alliance and who are helping push KVM forward as the next virtualization choice for everybody. And that way we can start off with something like that allows anybody a chance to come in.
And you mentioned the Open Virtualization Alliance. Last year, I was fortunate enough to attend the Red Hat Partner Summit in Dublin, and I met Scott Crenshaw, who was described by a lot of people as the cloud guy or head of cloud or something like that. I don't know whether that was some kind of puns in there somewhere, but he was talking a lot about the Open Virtualization Alliance. So how do you guys kind of interface with that, and how does that relate to what you're doing?
Well, you can think of the Open Virtualization Alliance, or OVA. I like that because it's got that egg analogy, as the industry consortium, perhaps that is focused on promoting KVM as a virtualization choice. But one of the things about alliances like that is it's more about everybody's marketing teams and different teams getting together, and as well as on the back end, the business teams and the product teams, and everybody talks about different stuff and pushes forward. But it's not about actually creating code and getting things done. So I would think of the oVirt project as a place where OVA's, what's the American expression, where the rubber meets the road. It's the place where activity actually can happen, and where these companies can take their developers and put their developers where they've been saying through OVA, this is what we want to do, and now oVirt is the place to actually do it.
And you mentioned that it's a pure kind of meritocracy, and it's important as part of the the setup of the organization that everyone is equal within it. Does that help with kind of inter-company relations? Because I heard some talk at the conference. There were some jokes about the fact that getting HP and IBM to work together was slightly difficult at the start. Does having anything equal, does that help you beat those challenges and make everyone feel that they have the same amount of say and input into what's going on?
Well, I think it does, because it provides. If you think about it, we have a similar situation that I'm familiar with, in that there are other board members that are Canonical and SUSE who have competing Linux products in the marketplace. So they're considered by many to be competitors with Red Hat, right? But in this situation, it's a place where we, just like the Linux kernel and many other upstream projects, where we all want to get together evenly. And I personally think that bringing in competitors also provides us it's a little honesty check for all of us to make sure that we're doing things in the right kind of way. So, for example, in the workshop last November, there were a number of discussions around what to do with the components of oVirt that were tied really closely with the Fedora Linux, the open community Linux that Red Hat is a big sponsor of. And there are some components that are currently very tied and are essentially the oVirt node, which is the node that that the hypervisors sit on is Fedora based, and naturally other people are going to want to make it based on other Linuxes, and just being able to have those kind of conversations and to be thinking about that honestly and with every move that the developers are making is really important to make sure that they're not locking anybody into a particular solution by accident just because it's sort of what we're used to doing around here.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely makes sense. And kind of lastly on the community side of things, I was looking through your documents about maintainers, and one of the ways that you kind of rate the maturity of a project is the number of maintainers and the number of releases they've had and so on. And it explicitly says that in order to be a maintainer, you don't actually have to have written code or be a coder, which I found really refreshing, actually, because people tend to only associate that kind of thing with number of lines contributed. But if you are leading, say, documentation and other areas, you can still become a maintainer. So is that important to bring in people outside of the core coder kind of group?
Yeah, that's wildly important. And myself as a non-coder, that it was the kind of thing that was important for me to see in there as well when I got involved, and make sure I'm pretty sure that was written in before I got there, so I can't lay claim to it at all. But that's definitely a principle that comes from a lot of open source projects. I know we practice it in the Fedora project a lot, and I've held position on the Fedora project board and was a documentation leader, essentially a maintainer in that world. And I think that the reason why it's really important is that experts don't drop out of the sky. We would all love expert in whatever field to just come in and to say, I'm ready, I'm fully experienced, what can I do to help? But most experts are grown from within the project. So there's this idea of legitimate peripheral participation, which is essentially allow people to do whatever it is they want to do, even if it's folding napkins or sweeping up, because it gives them an opportunity to be involved and learn about the project and then find a way that they can be more passionate about it. So it's important when people come into that position to know that no matter what it is they do, there's an opportunity that they can become a maintainer, even if they don't fit into any of the known boxes so far. It's not unusual for somebody to come in and present something entirely new to a project that hadn't been thought of before, when it could be on an open marketing angle, running an event, anything like that. And you want to make sure that those people can have an opportunity to, in the meritocracy, to have an equal say and an equal in the direction of where things are going.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to bring Itamar back in a little bit because I don't want him to get too out of the conversation or fall asleep there.
Fall asleep.
So, so something that I imagine you guys hear a hell of a lot is the whole question about Zen, which is an alternative hypervisor, which many people watching will be familiar with. So I have to ask you, how can we compare what you guys are doing with KVM, oVirt, etc., to Zen and the solutions they've got? How do they stack up against each other?
So when Zen was started, it tried to solve problems like virtualizing CPU and memory. When Abhikiviti, the creator and maintainer of KVM, looked at this back in 2006, actually, they looked at this and said, well, we don't need this anymore. Because Intel and AMD provide those capability now at hardware, at chip level. So why invest all that energy in creating a hypervisor? Let's take Linux, which has a lot of features which a hypervisor needs. A hypervisor is kind of an operating system. You need power management, you need device driver, you need memory management, you need CPU scheduling. So all those features already exist in Linux. So let's take Linux and add to it what is KVM, the ability to use the virtualization capabilities of the CPU. So instead of, if you think about like Zen is a community around trying to add features to a hypervisor, trying to build a hypervisor, KVM community believes in don't do anything you don't need to and concentrate only on something that's you bring added value in. Try to make the Linux kernel a better hypervisor. So you get more than a decade of development around Linux kernel as part of your hypervisor. It's all about, it gives you great feature velocity. If someone adds a new feature like huge pages or NUMA support, a lot of memory enhancement to the Linux kernel, you get them for free in KVM, or almost for free in KVM, without the effort that you need if you had to do this in your own hypervisor. Device drivers, hardware enablement, all those features go into Linux almost automatically, you'd get them as part of KVM. So the difference in, I think, technology basically evolved, and KVM leverages a newer technology that I think makes it better in the way it leverages the investment so many community members have in Linux.
Yeah, and obviously being more closely tied to the kernel and kernel development and so on, as you were saying, must bring some great benefits. But I was conscious that recently, I know Linus Torvalds is a guy who likes to say, speak his mind, let's put it that way. And he came out and said I could care less about virtualization and things, that he didn't see it as an important area for the kernel. So I know he doesn't solely rule the kernel, but I was curious, was there a great amount of acceptance from the rest of the kernel developers when you guys were saying that we want to push KVM back into the mainstream kernel and so on? Were they keen on that?
So when KVM was sent as a patch, I think in 2006, 5,000 lines of code, making Linux kernel a hypervisor, I think it got in 2 months, which is, I think, kind of a track record for something like that. Then spent years trying to get into the kernel and are now partially part of it. So I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of Linux, but it doesn't really care which virtualization is there. But KVM got a major endorsement by being in the Linux kernel since 2006. Basically, existing in any Linux you'll find out there today has, unless it was disabled, probably KVM as part of its kernel. So it's a major endorsement, the way I see it, by the Linux kernel and the Linux community for KVM. And the years since then show that it's being used more and more and more and more.
Itamar, in this problem space, there's a lot of players. I mean, we have Nebula and Open Nebula and the Rackspace thing, whatever that one is, I forget now. How does this project, how does oVirt compare to what other sort of virtualization management platforms that are out there, and both in the open space community and even if you wouldn't mind comparing it as well to like some of the commercial offerings like VMware?
oVirt is a mature, robust, feature-complete data center virtualization platform. That's, I guess, mostly comparing it to the other open source solution out there. If you look at the commercial solution like VMware, so yes, VMware has been in the market a bit longer and still has more features than oVirt has, but I think oVirt today has all the features an enterprise need in order to create data center, virtualized data centers. So, the important 80% of the features, I think, are in or coming in upstream now to suffice for what a data center, for what an enterprise would want in his data center virtualization solution. So that's on the oVirt side. Mm-hmm. On the KVM side, if you compare oVirt to vSphere, there's also the KVM side, which you can compare to ESX. And there, thanks to the feature velocity of Linux, which I just mentioned, KVM actually, I think, passed ESX on a few fronts. If you'll take, for example, performance, there's a benchmark called SpecVirt, which VMware actually, I think, started to demonstrate the server SpecVirt is around server consolidation. It measures how many workloads of the same kind you can put on a host in tiles and keep the SLA for your users. And the only published results today, that goes also to the Zen question, I guess, is for KVM and VMware. And KVM, because of that open source Linux model and leveraging every new feature and scalability of Linux, can leverage much stronger boxes and has results which surpass what VMware can even do on bigger boxes, and is on par on the same boxes. So both for KVM at the hypervisor level, which oVirt leverages, oVirt is focused on KVM, I think we're on par, and in some places beyond where VMware is. And for the manager side, for the oVirt engine side, I think that compared to other open source solutions, I think we're providing the best server consolidation and virtual desktop, by the way. We didn't mention that so far. Both server consolidation and virtual desktop infrastructure solution is what oVirt provides today. And compared to VMware, compares the Pareto, the 80% of the features which are important for what an enterprise need. And I expect to see it deployed more and more in enterprises.
So at this point in the development cycle, would you say this is enterprise ready? I mean, could I bet the company on the software as it is now, and it's just missing some features maybe? Or is it still pretty early in the cycle and say more of maybe a late beta or something?
So oVirt had the first release was released in January, I think, if I remember correctly. The first release was released in January. Feature-wise, it covers everything you need, I think, as an enterprise to deploy it. I think we actually saw some enterprises deploying it. You can see them on the oVirt mailing list saying, we're deploying this, we're using this. It's very robust. I ran it for a month, no issues. Now, there's a difference between running a community edition released version, a community edition, head of the development branch, and a commercial solution, which based on the same code, which is what we call upstream and downstream, where upstream would have a version that you can run, and it has a certain life cycle to it. The community mostly focuses on developing and moving forward with features integrating latest stuff, let's say, what's interesting to developers to a degree and to early adopters. Enterprises usually want a life cycle which is much longer. They want this version to run for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and have the bug fixes only they care about being backported into this version, or features only if they're sure they're stable. So there is a difference between the upstream and downstream on the stabilization and the life cycle. Basically, that's what I think Red Hat and other downstream distributions do. They provide a service of maintaining a long-term release with stable release for those enterprise customers. Some of them will not change a version, other than once a year, but they will still want bug fixes during that year if they have issues. That there will always be bugs to fix.
And this may be more of a KVM question than oVirt in particular, but what sort of range of guest operating systems can I use with this? Does it need to be para-virtualized, or can I just use it as naked hardware?
So para-virtualized guest is a terminology taken from the Zen world, I think, where Zen needed that. In KVM, it's full virtualization. You don't need a para-virtualized guest in order to run it. You can run on KVM either Linux or Windows guests. The support we have actually for Windows guests is pretty good. It's not only Linux, although the hypervisor is Linux. You can run basically any x86-64 or 32 bits guest on it to various degrees of support based on who's ever pushing support for it. Obviously, Red Hat is pushing support for the Red Hat distributions. The other Linux vendors improve the support for their guests. But starting actually from the early Kubernetes days, Kubernetes focused in the beginning on virtual desktop infrastructure, which was mostly around Windows workshops. And virtual desktop in 2007 was Windows XP. So KVM in the beginning had para-virtualized drivers for Windows actually before it had them for Linux today, but they're both on par, but support is the same for all those guests. There isn't a KVM side a matrix of which guest has, known to work, doesn't know, has issues, etc. But in general, they're just all should all work on KVM, and supporting and certification depends on who's pushing it.
Well, we had a question from the chat room. We actually have a live chat room while we're taping this show, as I've mentioned a lot of times in the end credits. How about something like FreeBSD? Is that supported as well?
Excuse me, can you please repeat that question?
Yes, we had a question about the BSD family. Or would they also run as a guest just fine with this?
So I don't remember the exact status of BSD. I think there is some support for BSD on KVM, but I'm not familiar, with a concrete requirement or interest around this, and I actually invite people interested in virtualizing BSD to join either the KVM or oVirt and work with us on improving support for that if in case it doesn't work.
Now, in the beginning of the show, you mentioned something like live migration. Does oVirt support live migration?
Yes, actually, that's one of the nice things that when KVM was introduced very early on, it almost immediately got the support for live migration of virtual machines, which is considered a very advanced feature. It was kind of a testament to how quickly you can advance when you focus on the things you need and not on the rest of the hypervisor, which Linux provided. So I think since 2007, KVM has support for live migration, ability to move a virtual machine from one host to the other while it's still running.
Very cool. And I know here at work, I've been pushing to get something like OpenNebula up instead of our proprietary and also hand-rolled solutions. I'm particularly interested then in a comparison between this and OpenNebula, because it sort of looks like you're addressing the same workspace there, and OpenNebula is fairly mature, including the ability to create virtual data centers layered within each other. Is that something that oVirt can do? And also, what other comparisons would you make between this and OpenNebula?
I'm actually not familiar specifically with OpenNebula,
okay,
but I expect that anything you can do with OpenNebula, you'll be able to do with oVirt and then some with, again, the scope and breadth of features that we have, both just features of virtualization or just component in the solution, going to administration, SDK, CLI, self-service portal, history database, collecting statistics over time, reporting on top of that, a node, which we didn't mention so far, like oVirt Node, which is a solution in which you don't have to deploy a full-blown Linux, rather just something that looks more like the VMware ESXi, more like an embedded Linux, a stripped-down hypervisor, which only provides the virtualization services you need from Linux as part of the solution. So taking all of those, server virtualization, desktop, remote desktop access via the SPICE protocol, which lets you run even things like Skype from a virtual machine with things like high-quality audio-video, bidirectional audio-video, and high-definition video, USB remoting, smart card support, so a lot of features in various areas of oVirt that, again, I think are covering most other solutions.
Cool. What kind of technology is oVirt implemented in? I mean, what's behind the scenes? Is it a bunch of Perl code or C++ or something crazy like that? Or give me some of the architecture behind the scenes.
So we have the engine and the host. The engine is written in Java, so it's running as a JBoss application today, actually. It uses a database to store the information. We use Postgres today for the database. And for authentication, we integrate with external directories such as Active Directory if it's a Microsoft environment, or RHDS or FreeIPA for Linux environments. On the host, you'd have the KVM, which as the hypervisor, And wrapping it, you'll have Libreoffice as the KVM API we use. The agent the oVirt engine talks to on the node is called VDSM. It provides everything oVirt engine needs to do on the host, managing and provisioning, monitoring, configuring, and using storage, network, the virtual machines, and the host itself. Actually, one of the important things in virtualization is a lot of it is around storage. You can't run virtual machines if you don't have virtual disks. And a lot of energy in both oVirt engine and VDSM goes to the storage side. And we support usage of shared storage on top of either NFS, fiber channel, iSCSI, and we also support local storage. So a lot of code there to use from a large cluster. We can scale to 100 or 200 nodes, all using the same set of LUNs to provision thousands of guests from shared storage. That's actually kind of a unique scaling solution that even VMware doesn't have that sort of scale.
Now, I want to bring Karsten back in a little bit here. So I wanted to ask a bit about Spice, because this is the protocol which is also being open sourced, which you're using, you mentioned there, you're using for remote desktop stuff. It can do like HD video now, all kinds of amazing stuff. And I actually saw this in action when I was at the Red Hat Summit, where they were running the labs and the certification classes all through this kind of stuff. And there were also guys there from a company called Eagle. Let me get that right. Eagle. Yeah, IGEL. They do thin clients and stuff like that. So is this an area that's growing for your virtualization clients, going back to as kind of a virtual desktop as well as like virtual servers and so on?
So if that's a question to me, that's probably a good question that I can't answer, simply because.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. I mean, the main thing is when you've got an organization that is the way Red Hat is. We've got a lot of people who are focused on the community side, the communitization of things, if you will, and then people who focus on the productization. So. That's essentially a productization side of the house of who are they looking for as customers, what's the size of that base, and so on. And so I really don't know the answer to that, nor would I be silly enough to speculate. I personally think it's a really fantastic technology and opportunity, and I think I know that there are currently cloud services where you can essentially get a desktop from the cloud and you can bring it up. If you've got an iPad, you can bring up a Windows desktop. There's all these things going on out there, and I'm sure that these having an open source platform to be able to put together systems like that, we're going to see people spinning up things that are based on that are running Linux and KVM and oVirt and Spice and all this underneath, and then providing whatever desktop that people want. But I don't really know anything about what Red Hat's plans in those spaces are.
But you mentioned productization, I noticed, though, a couple of times. And I suppose playing devil's advocate a little bit, it occurs to me a lot of people will come along and say, what's in this for Red Hat? Why are Red Hat paying for the development of this and then letting other companies get involved and use it as well? It kind of it goes against some of the traditional models that other companies, mentioning no names, might use. So what is in it for Red Hat? Why are Red Hat why have they open sourced the project, and why have they brought the community model, and why are they paying to kind of keep it going and so on?
Oh, thank you. That is a question I can't answer, for sure. So essentially, this is an extension of the enterprise Linux model that we, I don't know if we pioneered, but we certainly really made a big deal out of by splitting off the original Red Hat Linux. Was a product that was released every 6 months, and that was great for the community. You could do rapid innovation, but for customers and software partners, that didn't work so well. They needed something that was stable long enough to actually to do their own quality assurance against, and then stayed in the market for long enough for people's typical IT life cycles, which can be 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, or up to 10 years. I think I think Red Hat Enterprise Linux just extended its life span to 10 years for the long-term support. So that's all in response to what the enterprise needs, and essentially the development model is to allow the open community to move at the speed that it needs to move, to follow a release cycle. The 6-month release cycle is a kind of thing that is sort of time-tested and works out for a lot of projects, to focus on a time-based release instead of a feature-based release. Whatever's there gets in at the time, and then if you want your feature to get into, you have another opportunity in 6 months to get in the next release. And we've just found it over the years that development model works really well for creating an innovation pipeline. And to me, the biggest power of the open source and the free and open source development model and the communities behind it is that it's a way to tap and share innovations across each other, to take ideas from one area and another area, put them together, and get the synergies of effect when people's minds around the globe are making things happen. So essentially, that's the core of the Red Hat business model, is that we make really good open source projects, do the best we can in every open source project that we're involved in. We have developers that are working on hundreds or thousands of upstream projects, and some of the projects we make a lot of attention to, and some of them we just get work done because that's what needs to happen. And so then essentially, when the idea is we know that those communities are going to create excellent code and create excellent things, we have our developers and our designers and documenters embedded in there as well. And so this is essentially what happens with the Linux kernel, and what happens in other places is it's a shared workspace where all of us can solve these common sets of problems, and then we can take that common code that we've created and do what we need to make it work for our own customer base. So on the Red Hat side, that means putting it through a quality assurance process and getting a support team that's spun up around it so they can support it for up to 10 years. The very difficult problems of open source sustainable engineering, which is the idea of figuring out how to backport fixes from the current versions that are happening in the open source community to the products that might be 1, 2, 3, 5, 7 years old, and as well as when a fix comes in there, is it worth forward porting to the upstream? All those kinds of considerations. So those are the things that matter to us and matter to our customers. So that when we take that community and are productizing it, those are the kinds of things that we're focusing on, building training around it, the whole package of things. And essentially, I think we know that this is maybe not more empirical; it's more experiential. That our experiences when projects are really robust and are humming along and doing great things, then it's really easy for us much easier for us to turn around and make a really good product out of that.
Excellent. I mean, that's an excellent answer. And as I say, I was kind of trying to do the devil's advocate bit there, so I'm glad you explained that a lot better than I could have. So I've got a couple of quick kind of technical questions for Itamar as well. So if I want to use oVirt and KVM and so on, what are the kind of technical requirements? What are the install requirements for for my hardware and so on? And is it packaged into all of the major Linux distributions and stuff? Can I just go and grab it from a package manager?
So let's start from the hardware. I think the most important thing is that you'll need a machine that has 64-bit support and a CPU that supports virtualization. If you bought it in the last, I think, 3 or 4 years, it probably does. But since virtualization and CPUs evolved dramatically in the past years, the latest you use, you'll get better performance for your virtual machines because there's better support for virtualization in the CPU, in the hardware in those years. So basically, any laptop can run virtual machines on it today. It's just a matter of how much memory and cores you'll have in it and the workload you'll try to run on it. For the engine side, you can actually run it inside a virtual machine if you want, or on any piece of hardware will carry probably the oVirt engine. You need a few gigs of RAM, but that shouldn't be an issue today for anything. From the software side, you can, as always with open source, you can try the development branch, not the place to start usually. You should probably start with the released version. The oVirt has a single version so far. We're working on the second version. So the first version was released in January, and the second version is planned for May. The first version is available as binaries you can deploy for the engine side, and RPM is mostly for VDSM. For both of them right now, I think that the only distribution that has RPMs for right now is Fedora, and Susan Canonical are working on adding support for as well. I think there's also some Gen 2 work around this, so various distributions still work in progress. The first version, we wanted to get a release out so people can start playing with it. I think Fedora 16 is probably your best bet for installing RPMs right now. If you go to oVirt.org, there's getting oVirt, deploying oVirt, etc. pages on doing this in various ways. Is this probably today Fedora 16? Work on other distributions still ongoing.
Sounds like something I could be playing with right away. Sounds really cool. So we're almost out of time. Unfortunately, we're up against a hard time limit today. So I have so many more questions I want to ask, but I just wanted to ask, is there anything that we've left out of this discussion this morning, Itamar, that you want to make sure people know about this project?
Just if you're interested in virtualization, it's cool. It's there. Join us, help us, help you, work with us on developing, testing, documenting. Tell us what you want. Tell us, where you want it to go, and just work with us to make it even a better project. oVirt.org, and all the rest of the information is there.
Very cool. And Karsten, same question to you.
Sure. The one thing I want to do is put a plug in for the next open workshop that we're having in Beijing on the 21st of March, and this is partially because the IBM people and Intel people out there are spinning up their teams the 2 days beforehand. There'll be Itamar is going to be there. Some of the other developers are going to be there, and it's the 21st of March is an opportunity for anybody to come in. It's a free event. You can find out about that on the front page of oVirt.org, and spread it to your friends who are in Beijing, because it's a great opportunity to get a good overview of the technology from the people who know it the best.
Thank you, Karsten. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask my two standard questions, because people will yell at me. They send me email every time if I don't do this. Karsten, I know you claim you're not a developer, but Emacs or VI?
Oh, I'm Emacs. I'm a writer for sure, and Emacs is mine. You bet.
Yay, one from my side. Okay, and again, you're not a developer. Favorite scripting language?
I have to say, I guess Bash so far, because that's where I've done most of everything in. That'll
work. That'll work. At the level there, it's probably just fine. And Itamar, same questions for you. Favorite script editor? What? Favorite text editor? I get it mixed up.
Well, if it's between VI and Emacs, I'd have to say VI, though. That's when I need to edit short files. For documents, I'd use probably LibreOffice.
Okay.
And that's for that one. For scripting language, for scripting, Python would be the scripting language for me for developing today Java.
Okay, very cool, very cool. Well, guys, again, I'm sorry we're running out of time, but I just want to thank you both for coming on and representing the oVirt project very well. And I'm sure there are now a few people who are going right to the site as they're listening to this, going, oh, let's go check this thing out. It sounds like the kind of thing that can solve some of our problems. So thank you both, Karsten and Itamar, for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Very good, very good. Well, that was Karsten Wade, the community architect at Red Hat, and Itamar Heim, who manages the Red Hat Virtualization Manager. Oh, did I get all the letters in there? Yeah, Virtualization Manager Engineering Group. Dan, what do you think?
I thought it was really interesting. And as you said, I had more questions than I think you did as well that we could have asked. It's a very interesting topic that a lot of people are trying to find out more about at the moment. And I think the thing that we kind of touched on there was we all know that VMware and other similar things, VMware is massive in this space. There's a lot of other proprietary things out there. Microsoft are doing things as well. I would support any kind of open source solution to this, and it's great to see that there are some really, really good solutions and open source solutions as well.
Well, it's definitely a really exciting place to be working in right now because, there was this natural progression. We started with single-use computers that ran one thing at a time, and then to scale up, we invented time sharing so that we could have multiple people all appear to have the entire machine to themselves. And, virtualization is like the next layer of that, multiple people running multiple machines that are time sharing within them as well. Think of what's the next level going to be? Virtual hardware across, I don't know. I don't want to think about it right now. Anyway, but it seems like like this interesting thing as we get faster and faster and faster hardware. How do you take advantage of the fact that we don't all need that CPU right this microsecond? And how do we get that all to be shared out? But these other important things, like live migration, being somewhat isolated from the hardware in case we want to quickly move or restart a project on a different piece of hardware, so we don't have to reinstall everything over the next machine. It's really going to be more and more important. I mean, like my primary client here, Media Temple, is they're constantly thinking about that. They have to think about how do we provide web servers and mail servers for all of the customers out there, and people like Amazon making a huge amount of money on stuff like this, Rackspace, a lot of companies in this space as well. So I'm sure they're all very concerned about this stuff. So I'm glad I got these oVirt guys on. In fact, I'm going to talk to the guys today in my group and say, hey, let's go take a look at this as well as working on OpenNebula. Anyway, so enough on that. I think anything else, Dan, before I move on?
No. Go ahead.
All right, so my usual thing here is the awkward transition to the upcoming guests, which I didn't even do one, which is fine. I guess that's the awkward transition. There's no awkward transition. So next week we have, presuming no little demons aggravate us and get in the way again, we're going to have a show next week on Delta Cloud, which David Lettercourt's going to come in and talk about that, and I didn't look it up, but it's another Red Hat-related project. You might have noticed a whole stream of Red Hat-related projects recently. It's because we've been getting help from Red Hat to schedule some of these things in, and the way you can get on the show, of course, is to email me, and then you'll fit in the slot as well. We've got, but very special show coming up after that. Michael Meeks and Charles Schwartz. No, not the guy that drove peanuts. He's dead. But a different Charles Schwartz is going to talk to us about Libreoffice. Big, important topic. In fact, you just heard it mentioned a moment ago, which is that it's basically the open source replacement for Office and Microsoft products like that. Francisco Valero and Thomas Sedovic are going to talk to us about Aeolus. And I should have looked all these up before I did the show. We've got a few other guests coming up later in the first quarter and a little bit in the second quarter already. If you go to the spreadsheet link from twit.tv/floss, you can find all the important things coming up there. And if you might have heard earlier in the show, we do have a live chat room. So if you go to live.twit.tv during our taping time, which is generally 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays. Today it was a little bit early because we're up against the iPad 3 announcement coming up shortly. But you can actually ask us questions. So we'll pass those along to the guests. You can follow Floss Weekly on Google+. That's a really great place to get information about us. And also on Twitter at Floss Weekly, @Floss Weekly. You can follow me at Merlin, MERLYN, on Identica and Twitter. And I'm also posting about 5 to 10 things a day on Google+. If you happen to be in Portland this weekend, I'm actually heading back for the first time in 5 weeks. I'm going to do some karaoke in Portland. So watch my Twitter feeds and you'll find out where I'm going to be. Dan, where can we find more about you?
Yeah, well, the best place to find out all the things I'm doing, various podcasts and so on, you'll see the Linux Outlaws t-shirt I've got on today. I've a bit of product placement there. You can find all that stuff at danlynch.org. If you go and have a look, there's also links to Identica, Twitter, Google+, all those kind of things, Facebook and so on, and many other things that I'm up to. So go and check them out. Check out the Linux Outlaws. We do a weekly show about open source Linux topics, predictably. And we talk for about 90 minutes each week about all those kind of things, news and all of that. So you can find links to all of that at danlynch.org.
Sometimes 90 minutes, sometimes 2 hours.
Yes.
You've been having some long shows lately. I've been trying to get through all of them. It's great. But great show. I really appreciate you and Fab pulling that thing off together often enough that I can stay informed about the things I can't keep up with on the rest of my day and schedule. So thank you for putting out Linux Outlaws. And once again, thank you for being my co-host. It's always a pleasure.
No problem. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Very good, very good. Well, I say this every week. Not every week, but as often as I do say it, we'll see you all again next time, hopefully next week on Floss Weekly.